I'm talking about traumatized psyche and traumatized soul. When I was putting together an earlier draft, I had a reflective note that I put in, which I shall read out, which says, I said not for inclusion, but I decided to include it. It's something like this: I find this very difficult to pull together. I think that's partly to do with my emotional state. My mother died recently, and partly to do with the material. It needs a rather dispassionate view to be able to be outside and inside and comment, and yet I'm not outside. I'm very much caught up with the material inside. This is a dilemma for all of us, I reflected, who work with trauma as the main focus of our work. We are both outside and inside, and we have to manage. The thing that was happening to me this morning is, of course, when you go last, you hear everyone else's talk, you think, So I've had a bit of that process going on, and also then I had a fear that, maybe I'm taking a very left hemisphere approach to this work. Oh God, then what? And came to the conclusion that even if that is the case, that what I'm talking about really does come into context when we think about why society is more left hemisphere dominated if it is. That at the heart of that, in my view, is the extent of trauma to the psyche and soul that is increasing in our society. So that's where I'm coming from in this, but I have all sorts of things going on. And Ian started us off in a wonderful big picture in front, brought us down to the clinic, and I'm sort of bringing us down to the individual, so I feel I'm taking us down a bit. I work in the field of psychotrauma. I work with phenomenological resonance-based process, having practiced as an integrative psychotherapist and an executive coach, and also worked in the field of organisational leadership development for some time. So I straddle both the worlds of the corporate world of coaching and the therapy world, which is quite an interesting place to find oneself. I now call myself an actual researcher in this field, which I use because it gives me leeway to do what I like, really, so that's quite a free space to find myself in. My opening message, though, is to talk here about that to understand trauma, traumatized psyche and traumatized soul, is we have to enter a dance between metaphor and science. That we need to bring the two together. It's a free-flowing dance between the two, which allows some evolution and some sharing between them. One on its own is incomplete. We need to understand the depth and extent of inner experiences and their consequences by using both. So that's a key message for me. And calling this a dance takes us to the body, where traumatized psyches shape how we think about our bodies, where the function of the right hemisphere is compromised, so is our capacity to relate to our body as something we live in and through. Consequently, there are problems of tuning into the information being conveyed by our bodies. This becomes clear in the resonance work I do. And Ian has already reminded us of the link between the body and soul from Wittgenstein. So we already have ideas of bodies and souls and psyches. Trauma is one of those words which can be used to mean so many different things. It's very confusing. When I talk to a whole range of different groups, it's a very confusing concept. When we talk about physical trauma, it's easy. We can see the wound or find it relatively easily. But when used as a metaphor for emotional and psychological experience, it can be very confusing and convey so many different meanings. So let me be clear, I'm using it specifically here to mean a split in the psyche itself, a result of an unbearable level of stress, which causes dissociation as a result of fear of life itself. I'm also using the term psyche in a specific way, although clearly it means soul, spirit, and breath of life, has already been said. I'm using it to mean a complex psychosomatic network. That is, the interaction of body sense, perception, energy, emotion, and thought. A traumatized psyche, then, is one that has suffered a psychic catastrophe, when our very emotional, psychological, or physical life feels at profound risk of annihilation. We might be able to use science to measure aspects of this, for example, scan brain activity or the level of stress hormones present. However, as has been said before, we don't really need that. We feel and see the impact and the wide range of survival and adaptive behaviours that that is response to dissociation and hyperarousal, and all the avoidant behaviours which distract us from the inner pain and numb the pain. As a definition of the soul, and I have none of my own, so I'm using Ian's, a sort of elusive energy process, not matter, a disposition towards life, which has a sort of a resonance for me, this idea that it's a dimension of inner experience, somewhere in between the emotional, physical and mental. Ian talks of the right hemisphere's capacity to have a sense of what he calls the other, something other or bigger than us, from which we came and may return. The idea of soul being a disposition towards life, together with the idea of there being a mysterious life force which has to be chosen, feels pertinent to the world of traumatised psyche and the ability to keep living despite terrible experience. Sometimes it is too much, of course. The traumatised person runs out of that disposition, and they're too much for even a living soul to hold. My thought is that the energy of the soul runs through the psyche, and it gets blocked where the psyche is damaged through experience. The trauma, the energy flow is disrupted or distorted or blocked by the trauma, the consequences of that. The science part of the dance is that of neuroscience and developmental psychology. Not my areas of expertise, but I've tried. And Ian's work and many of the others helps make that clear for us about how we can draw on that to deepen our understanding. So I repeat, it's a dance between metaphor and science, to really try and understand what it is that is at the heart of individual experience and also then enacts so deeply in society. Having got some definitions out of the way, what is it I want to talk about? Well, I did find it quite challenging to get to grips with this, which was interesting. I kept going round in circles. I lost my footing. I thought of what I might say and then it went. However, what I have decided to focus on is a number of things, and these are they. It is my view, and of course people are open to disagree, that psychotrauma starts very early in life. It is cumulative, involves the trauma of identity, and its prevalence is widespread. Secondly, its incidence and impact appears to be increasing. Why is that? I have a few thoughts, but I picked up a local newspaper in London last weekend, which read, 1 in 3 children in Hackney last year was classified as at risk. The number of children at risk has risen by 29% in the last 4 years. These are just the children where the traumatised experience is seen. How many more are hidden from view? The impact is so great for these children as adults, their families and the corporate world. I would echo the view that it is really the major public health priority. One of the other issues I want to raise in talking about this is trying to understand the victim-perpetrator dynamic that is part of what I use the term survival strategies. The dynamic and how denial, numbing, distraction and illusion plays a part in avoiding the reality of having been either a victim or a perpetrator. My final point, as I get towards the end, will be that through all this there is a healthy self, which is where I think the life force comes from. In talking about all of this, I'm mindful of the points made by both Ian and Fred, that there's a danger of narrowing the focus too much, that using models can constrict what you see. So I hold that in mind as I narrow the focus and use a few models, but I ask you to hold that warning in mind. I'm talking about the development of an individual's psyche, their own complex body, network of body sensations, emotions, perceptions and energy and thoughts. I'm particularly focusing on the implications for brain development and early years experience. And I'm also mindful of what Ian said, that causation is complex and not linear. So I just ask you to hold that in mind as I talk as well. It is my view, and not mine alone, but I know it's not a widely held one, that the greatest percentage of all adult traumatology has roots in utero and the early years experience. That is not to deny the horrifying impact of war, famine, travelling dangerously across the world as a refugee, or of violence. These, of course, have major impacts on the psyche. But it's also, I think, true that the impact of these is also made much greater where there's been an earlier trauma. Due to the early development of the limbic system during gestation, it is possible now, we now understand, that dissociation can happen in the baby in utero. So we're moving even further back in our understanding of how trauma comes to be in the psyche. Such causal factors, and of course it's not linear, so there are many more factors at play as well, but might include the conditions of conception, including rape, the ambivalence of the mother towards the pregnancy, the stress environment that she might be living in, the fact that for the baby there might have been a failed abortion, a difficult birthing process where both mother and baby are caught in a life or death struggle. It might be that the baby now has surgery in utero. We can do amazing things with technology, fantastic things which save lives, but possibly cause a psychological trauma. Clearly all of these things have an impact on the woman, but they also have an impact on the developing psyche of the infant and on the relationship between the two. The other causes of early psychotrauma include, of course, the loss of a mother or somebody on whose one survival depends through illness or separation. Many neonates are nursed for weeks in incubators. We can do wonderful things with early premature babies, but they are in incubators, and there's no way we can make that a holding and caring environment as much as being out of the incubator. Some mothers become physically and emotionally ill and have to go away for their own well-being. The baby and young child can't understand any of that. When I was writing this, I saw there was a clip coming through on Twitter which was about the left's children in China. Some of you might have seen it. And the story was, now and how we organise life and work in the universe, is that parents in rural areas in China have to go to the cities to work. And they come back once a year. A modern phenomenon, it goes on. The children now have a category of they're called left children. It was a very touching little video clip, you can find it if you're interested, of how they are protecting the parents in their parents. Of course they have to do this. We have to be left. It's quite poignant. So the infant's limbic system and right hemisphere develops in utero, and there is, I understand, a brain growth spurt for the third trimester through to 18 or 24 months. This means that the brain's psyche development is shaped by the relationship with the mother, or whoever is acting as the mother role, and the external environment, and as such stores the internalised model of attachment relationships and strategies for affect regulation. Where the mother has a traumatised psyche herself, her own lack of contact with her body, her own neediness or terror means she can't attune to the baby or fully meet the baby's symbiotic needs. And while, as Freud says, many mothers may be mesmerised by their baby and feel the enormity of love, for others that brings great terror for them as well. Traumatised psyches are fragmented due to how memory of experience is stored, so the whole network of our connection between body, mind and emotions is fragmented. Dissociation, the escape when there is no escape from this experience, produces dead spots in our remembering, and we are therefore fragmented as we come to put our own story together. The baby can be experienced as a stranger. As I said, the intensity of love that can be felt can be terrifying for some mothers. The baby can be seen as a stranger. In response, the child sees the anger and fear in the mother's eyes, or sees the dissociation and is terrified of its own survival. It does whatever it can to get contact with the mother, finding ways to entice her to care for him or her. Anything to avoid abandonment, which would mean certain death. These adaptive patterns form an entanglement which plays out through all later relationships with self, with others, and with work. There is no biological imperative for the mother to bond with the baby for her survival. However, there is a biological imperative for babies to cling to the mother no matter how terrifying that contact might be, and however much they sacrifice of themselves in the process of doing so. The traumatised psyche is very vulnerable to further fragmentation. For example, if it started in utero with the conditions it finds itself and continues post-birth in attachment with the mother, it's already started, there's something already built up. Mothers with their own cumulative unresolved trauma are themselves less able to protect themselves for a start, but also less able to protect their children. Their ego boundaries are damaged through their own trauma and their ability to make executive decisions. As a result, they may find themselves in abusive relationships. The children of such mothers are therefore highly vulnerable to neglect, physical or sexual abuse within the family or close community. Using a hypothetical example, a child of deeply traumatised parents, neglected by their emotional absence, goes looking for some contact and finds an older couple down the lane. They let the child play in the garden, give sweets and cake. The wife leaves the child alone with the husband. He sexually abuses the child for 8 years from the age of 4. Nothing is said. No one at home sees. The child doesn't tell, wanting to spend time in the garden and terrified of what would happen if their father found out. The child, as an adult, possibly turns themselves to alcohol quite early on, or to drug abuse, or to failure to manage their own medical condition. The more a child is exposed to such events, the more complex is the trauma, the more fragmented is their psyche. Of course, the father or current partner's psychological trauma is also important to the extent to which they're able to provide reparative emotional support and protection to the mother and baby, and the extent to which they have the capacity for emotional regulation and do not resort to anger or frustration. And also, in trauma of love or attachment trauma, where the baby can't get their needs met well from the mother, they often turn to the father in the hope that it will be met there. And if the father is unavailable through his own trauma, then there is no space for the child to go. I'll say a bit more later about bonding system trauma, where generation after generation of family carries and is affected by sexual and physical abuse. In such content, there is so much betrayal, shame and secrets, with deep confusion within the psyche about trust, violence and love. However, children go home. It's the only place they know, even when home has little comfort for them. A traumatised psyche is a trauma of identity. From conception onwards, the infant is processing information, affected by the maternal hormones and the environment they are in, for example, whether they're a twin or not. Self-awareness comes from the psyche and brain development. The frontal right lobe expands if there is a playful interaction with the mother. It is the playground for the growing self. Where this relationship is affected by the trauma in the mother, the self cannot develop in the same way. The baby learns to become the baby the mother will respond to, or the mother's idea of what a baby is, to quote Winnicott. So giving up on its own self-development. In place, a constructed self is developed, made from identifications with the mother and attributions from whom they depend onto the baby. This constructed self comes to feel normal, but over life it can break down as the effort to keep it in place is too great. It can come to feel as if we're living somebody else's life. Traumatised psyche is therefore an identity trauma. The playground for the growing self is more of a battlefield, which the baby learns how to survive and takes that into adulthood. It can become confusing about what is and isn't ours. The process I work with brings this confusion to the surface. Whose trauma is it are we talking about? Whose survival strategies? Who am I? What is mine? If we're not clear who we are, that is, the I in my body, as a core being, we cannot know what we want for ourselves for a healthy existence. If we don't know that, we can't harness the resources we need as adults to obtain it. We need a functioning right hemisphere for self-motivation, for movement towards our own life. Finding out factual information can help that identity reformation. For example, finding out about the mother's situation as a child of her parents, the situation, conception, the pregnancy of oneself, finding out as much as I can about the situation of a father as a son and a grandson. We have to be able to separate out what is ours and what is that we've identified from our mother and father or our grandparents. Not having a clear identity makes it hard to integrate our own cut-off feelings and brings deep insecurity. I realise that the picture I'm giving is of a traditional heterosexual form of parenting. There is another talk that I could give about the impact of the traumatised psyche, where the gestational mother is not the same as the person raising the child, or where conception takes place in a different way, and where the role of meeting the symbiotic needs of the baby, the mother function, is taken on by another person. I'm choosing not to do that here, but I just wish you to hold that in mind, as I realise I'm taking a fairly heterosexual traditional view to this narrative as I go through. I see the distribution of complexity of trauma as a normal distribution curve. Be careful of bottles. Clue number one. So on one end of the scale, as always, there's little or no trauma to the psyche. At the far end is those with the most complex traumatised psyches, and in the middle is the rest of us. Put yourself where you like. I have no data for this, of course. This is just an idea, a way of thinking about psychic trauma. Because the ones with the most complex, the ones who do come into mental health services, they will come into chronic health conditions. They will be those that resort to alcohol, drug or compulsive sex as they try and find a way to numb their pain, subject to their own access to a life spirit, to an energy to resolve their trauma. However, there are many families and individuals who carry very well hidden traumatised psyches. In such families, nothing looks wrong to the outside world. It looks like a happy family. The stories told in the family obscure the problems and difficulties and perpetuate the illusion of happiness. Challenging this narrative can feel very dangerous and disloyal, bringing up old fears about abandonment and rejection. Telling the truth can feel very dangerous no matter what the trauma. People say, oh, you're making this is a lot of it. I wasn't traumatised or anything. I wasn't abused. And of course, sexual and physical abuse is a major assault on the psyche, over and above attachment trauma or trauma of love or early trauma. However, to see it as the only way for one's psyche to be traumatised is a form of denial about the reality of one's situation, in my view. It closes down an exploration of the way the mind and psyche has become entangled with the needs of mother or father and repeated in further relationships with self, others and work. It makes integration of cut-off experience impossible. I'm going to just quote a few extracts here from a poem by Carol Ann Duffy called Remember Your Childhood Well. You might know it. If you don't, I encourage you to Google it and have a look. Nobody hurt you. Nobody turned off the light and argued with somebody else all night. The Bad Man on the Moors was only a movie you saw. Nobody locked the door. No one sent you away. There was an extra holiday with people you seemed to like. They were firm. There was nothing to fear. There was no one to blame but yourself if it ended in tears. What does it matter now? Nobody left the skid marks of sin on your soul and laid you wide open for hell. You were loved, always. We did what was best. We remember your childhood well. I'm going to move on and pick up my second point, which is about, despite all our efforts, what appears to be an increase in the prevalence of psychotrauma. Again, we don't have much data, but we could look at some of the things that are coming out about children who are accessing the mental health services, children who are turning into adults who are finding a difficult place in the world. I have a few thoughts, and one that I'm going to expand on, and Ian gave some thoughts earlier as well. My first is that we actually don't take trauma seriously. Second is we don't really understand it. and fail to attend to what lies behind the symptomatology that presents. And that there are many opportunities in the society in which we live for re-traumatisation. If we took trauma seriously, we would really need quite heavy-duty conversations about societal and political responses, as well as personal ones. We need to explore why society is in denial about trauma, if you believe it is, why it doesn't want to understand it, why it wishes to blame the victims, why we don't fund schemes that enable more individual healing or support mothers with their babies, and why society at times appears to support perpetrators. As a sidestep, I do work about what trauma and coaching have together. Look in any business or coaching book index, you will never see trauma listed there at all. When I started talking about trauma to the corporate world, I was told not to use the word trauma because it would scare people. Initially I thought, oh well, maybe they're right. You know, if I want to get the word over, maybe I should use a different term. But then I thought, if I don't name it, I'm colluding with the denial and avoidance. So I used it, and I think I probably did scare a few people. So be it. I think one of the other reasons that psychic trauma is increasing in prevalence is that there is limited understanding of what psychic trauma is, how it manifests itself, and the consequences of that within society. And of course that not knowing is denial. I'm going to bring another, this is a model alert number 2. I'm going to bring in a model which comes from the work I've been doing with Professor Franz Rupert on identity-oriented psychotrauma. It's a simple diagrammatic model as a metaphor, but it seems to echo some of what is written from the science and from other perspectives about trauma itself. The proportionality of each of these segments, the healthy self, the survivor self, and the traumatized self, you can see as varying. They're not fixed, they vary depending on the complexity of the trauma experience and the nature of the environment that we currently find ourselves in. In trauma, Franz Rupert says, the psyche splits, giving rise to a survival self whose job is to protect us from knowing and feeling the trauma. The trauma self represented the fragmented, implicit memory of emotions, shame, rage, terror, helplessness, the physical sensations and the cognitions. Held in as implicit memory in the right hemisphere and the connection through that to the body. As long as trauma is unresolved, the stress hormones are always on high alert, leaving the person fighting unseen dangers. The trauma self is said to be frozen in time. It doesn't mature because it's locked away and is not open to being explored. And in re-traumatization, the body remembers and produces intense somatic and emotional responses. Through dissociation, the survivor self is created. Its job, as I said, is to suppress the inner chaos through a range of adaptive behaviour. One might say that left hemisphere takes charge. Whether that's true or not, I really don't know. So I'm using that as a point of metaphor here rather than wanting to say it's true. But what gets cut off is the access to body information, the deep emotional processes, and to metaphor, all those things Ian referred to earlier this morning when we started. What gets put in place is a controlled, managed experience. When that is not possible or breaks down, survival is helped by numbing through alcohol or drugs or compulsive or overwork, anything to try and block out the body, distract us from feelings in the body and the trigger of these trauma cells. What I like about the model, though, with all the reservations about the model, is the reminder that there is a healthy self, there is the capacity to have some sense of core self remains, however fragile that might be. That's part being free from entanglement with others, enabling good contact with the body, capacity for emotional regulation, capable of facing reality and of being responsible for oneself. It offers a connection with that life spirit, the elusive energy of the soul, in my view. It's a part where that energy can flow freely. Of course, mothers have access to their healthy self as well, and will connect with their baby through this at times. It is the lack of predictability of that contact and the switch between healthy survival and traumatised parts which adds to the traumatisation psyche of the baby. And the baby then takes that into adulthood themselves as well. And in our relationships with people, we will also move between connecting in these three different parts, if you see them as having something to offer. We survive the re-experiencing of inner pain by turning our attention away. We develop these survival strategies to help us do that. It's those that cause the continuing problems for us. That, together with the cut-off feelings and what gets created in order to survive. Denial, of course, is a core survival activity. No, it didn't happen. No one wants to remember trauma. We'd all rather hold on to the illusion of safety. At the same time, there's such great shame of having been a victim of traumatising experience, and so much of the memory is implicit that remembering is a difficult, fragmented and complex task. Other survival strategies, I've named a few, include avoidance of intimacy and the use of control, keeping others and our needs at bay. This control might be over our bodies, as in anorexia or self-harm, or over-exercising, or might be we keep others under control where we can deal with them. We find any number of ways to distract ourselves from feeling. To quote T.S. Eliot from the Four Quartets, we are distracted from distraction by distraction, filled with fantasies and empty meaning. The body, however, remembers and is always present when the mind might be elsewhere. As Nietzsche said, symptoms are crying out of the body, telling you it's had enough. Psychosomatic illnesses are illnesses of the soul, a distortion of life energy, and the result of unresolved trauma. Trauma to the psyche compromises the ability of the body. Trauma to the psyche compromises our ability to keep body and soul together. We need a functioning right hemisphere to have insight into illness and inner experience. We have become cut off from our body. The left hemisphere has a different relationship with the body. It is detached from it and treats it more as an object, so it cannot make up for deficits in the right hemisphere's functioning. Because trauma self is cut off and out of awareness, it is also vulnerable to being re-traumatised within the environments which we find ourselves, and by how we construct society itself, I believe. By this I mean the trauma feelings and stress hormones bursting through the control of the survival self. This re-traumatisation is out of our awareness, and the switch is made to reinforce the survival behaviour. As I said, I often work in the corporate world, and for many, the world of work and the roles assigned to them and the groups one becomes part of are re-traumatising, trigger enhanced survival strategies. For some, work may always be re-traumatising. For others, the nature of the work itself may bring about that risk, for example, the armed forces, the rescue services, and those in health and social care. For many, it is the context of a particular role or work environment which brings about re-traumatisation. The result is the survival strategies of bullying, control, avoidance, overwork. If they don't want me, at least they'll need me. Stress and illness. Work disturbance is as much an indicator of trauma to the psyche as any other form of survival, and yet often goes unrecognised. As I said earlier, there are only very few mentions of trauma in books on work in the corporate world. This brings me to my third overall point today. One of the other reasons I think trauma to the psyche continues on increase is that we do not face up to the victim and perpetrator dynamics, an inevitable part of survival self. Psychological trauma is the territory of victims and perpetrators. We can see this clearly in trauma of violence and in sexual abuse. However, it is harder to think of the mother as a perpetrator and a non-attunement, but the effect is the same. In all psyche traumas, there are actual victims and actual perpetrators. Both suffer trauma to the psyche, and both develop survival strategies to avoid facing the reality. The survival strategies of victims are well documented, I think. We know about the freezing dissociation at time. We understand about protecting the perpetrator, especially the close family member, clinging emotionally to perpetrators. not recognising perpetrators, being confused about who to trust and who not to trust, and also disgust at one's own weakness and assumption of guilt. The survival strategies of the perpetrator will seem clearer to us now that we have the exposure of Jimmy Savile. During the perpetration, the individual is said to feel tremendous guilt and shame, but that gets split off with the trauma feelings. The survival strategies of the perpetrator include not seeing the harm, being in denial, blaming and insulting victims, feeling oneself to be a victim, claiming an ideology for justifying their actions as in a cult, demonstrating good works, doing good things for charity and society, and continuing to claim and protect their power. We need to focus on victims of perpetration, of course we must. However, most perpetrators were victims, and in situations of rape or sexual abuse, the perpetrator uses perpetration as a survival strategy, but each act will be re-traumatising for him or her. As well as these specific survival strategies, an internalised victim-perpetrator dynamic is set up, which acts like a pendulum, swings between victim and perpetrator. So swings between feelings of intense helplessness and vulnerability to the other side, rebellious fury. Swing, swing, swing. Developing a victim attitude, which comes from that dynamic, prevents an individual taking the action they need and could take as an adult if they could harness the energy of the healthy self and life spirit. As a child, we had no choices. We were dependent on those around us for survival. I think here of that survivor, I think she wrote a book and there was some publicity given to her of a very neglected upbringing due to alcoholic and clearly traumatised parents who, aged 11 or 13, took her siblings with her to the police station and asked her to take her to a place of safety. I don't know if you remember that story. It's an extraordinary act for a child to have been resourceful enough to make. Extraordinary. As adults, though, we do have choices. Painful ones, no doubt. Ones that have to ask us to reshape our whole idea of ourselves. But we do have choices. But being stuck in a victim attitude stops us being able to take the action that we need to save ourselves. The internal perpetrator, described by Kalshe as being part of the self-care system, creates this internal or physical self-abuse to keep away from the internal pain of the trauma. This may be given in the attributions we give ourselves, or we're given and retained, for example, I'm bad, I'm rotten inside, I'm completely unlovable. Or it may include self-harm, as in cutting or anorexia, or the overwork I've mentioned before. The internal perpetrator can also be acted out on others. In a non-physically harmful way, this might be through control or undermining of others, or bullying. Higher up the scale of impact, it might be through sexual, physical and emotional abuse of those seen as weaker, often children and women, within the family and close community setting. The abuse of others in a family and community produces a vicious cycle that sucks in more and more people and can go on for generations. The whole bonding system is dominated by trauma and the associated shame, secrets and denial. Generation after generation of men, women and children, experiencing abuse themselves and surviving in the only ways they know, confusing love and violence. So much covered up and so much denial. Working with victims is of course essential, and the earlier we start and find proper places for safety, the better. As adults, it is possible to turn away from a family dominated by trauma. In fact, it's essential, I would say. But how can we protect children and give them somewhere to feel safe? I think we also have to find ways to work effectively with perpetrators. We have to find a way to get through that and to find some sensible way of helping them out of that bind for themselves. My fourth point today is about the healthy self and the soul. Having just ended up in the darkest part of traumatised psyche and soul, that of bonding system formed down the generations, I would like to put us back to this idea of self, which is beyond that created by our parenting, and to the soul, that energy process which flows through the psyche where it is able to. Trauma to the psyche involving the limbic system and the right hemisphere is a shock to the unity of the person and threatens to extinguish that energy. Shengold called this soul murder. A traumatized psyche creates an inner void, a sense of emptiness, the holes in the soul, the soul-shaped hole that he had mentioned earlier. There is no doubt that trauma to the psyche and the lack of energy being able to flow free, and the lack of energy flowing freely brings a lack of vitality, of spontaneity, of self-compassion. Compassion and caring for others, while unable to feel self-compassion, is a distraction. It is a survival strategy. The only way to move towards an integration of the fragments of psyche is to develop contact with our healthy self. We can do this by becoming aware of our survival strategies, which are of course largely unconscious, mostly unconscious. In so doing, we can begin to open up that space that Ian mentioned at the end of his talk, which allows us to stop, to remain still, to wait for what is. The survival strategies distract us from that all the time. We can also build up the healthy self, as previously mentioned, through practices that take us into resonance with ourselves, through meditation, body movements, activities that offer an encounter with the self. Through contact with this healthy self, we can begin to face the reality of our experience without re-traumatization. We can allow memory to emerge through work with the body and bring the cut-off experience into light. It does need the body, though. We do have to do the work through the body because the body remembers, as several authors have made clear to us in their well-read books. Some try to bypass this through engaging in survival strategies disguised as healthy ones, the distorted mirrors, to quote Kalshed. For example, some think working to forgive the perpetrator or to find a relationship with the perpetrator will be healing, and the work is focused on that, rather than engaging with one's own painful integration. True forgiveness is to step out of the victim-perpetrator dynamic, to claim oneself, and to stop looking towards the perpetrator for some kind of salvation. Others can engage in faux spiritual practice. I hesitate here as I realise I could be in very dangerous territory. But engagement with spiritual practice for the survival self can be like a spiritual bypass, can act like a spiritual bypass, trying to shore up a shaky sense of self with spiritual practice rather than through the more complex work needed. It is another relational entanglement, looking for the contact that was missing in childhood. The RSA project, mentioned by Ian, called Spiritualize, Revitalising Spirituality to Address 21st Century Challenges, explores the concept of spirituality at great length. The report talks about many positive and healthy forms of spirituality needed now to help take ourselves through the challenges. It also identifies that there has been what they term a growth in capitalist spirituality, the subversion of the spiritual into commercialisation and as such into a market. It is no surprise to me that there has been a huge growth in spiritual practices at the same time that there seems to be a huge growth in traumatization. There is a quest for something, for meaning and for wholeness. I consider the urge for healing and wholeness to be a spiritual activity. It comes from a life energy, from a functioning right hemisphere's ability to have a sense of the other. However, searching for safety can be a survival strategy, and this searching provides a market opportunity at a time when so many carry a traumatized psyche and soul. Engagement through the healthy self, it seems to me, enables an engagement with the spiritual and one's life reality, facilitating the means of grappling with the complex and painful fragmentation of the inner world and being able to accept the reality of our experience. To think we can escape from that reality of what happened to us is an illusion. The way to re-engage the life spirit is through the healthy self, so that we can bring our authentic self, come together with our memories, to liberate the memories that have been cut away in order they can be taken into our own identity, become fully part of ourselves, so we're not cut off from ourselves. Despite the reality of the extent of psyche to the trauma in our society, I think there is hope. To lose hope is to fall into the victim attitude. We start where we can. We have to take trauma seriously, it seems to me, at the level of society, communities, families and individuals. We make the start by taking our own seriously and by doing what is our gift to understand psychotrauma so we can walk beside our clients and friends in their endeavours. Remember, as Carl Shedd tells us, the patient's right brain can only develop as far as the therapist's right brain can take them. So, the dance between metaphor and science continues. I've drawn much on the work of others to whom I'm very grateful. That's my reading list, that's a bibliography. And I'm very grateful to them. And I hope I have interpreted their work accurately and brought it into some contact with mine and contributed to that dance. My world is more that of metaphor, so I've been learning some dance steps. I'm reassured, however, as Ian states in the last sentence of his book, I'm just proving I've read it, the last sentence of the book, it turns out to be just a metaphor, I will be content. I have a high regard for metaphor. It's how we come to understand the world. I'm just going to end by reading the full text of the poem by Caroline Duffy, if that's okay, just as we end. Some you'll recognise because I read a few of the verses already. Nobody hurt you. Nobody turned off the light and argued with somebody else all night. The bad man on the moors was only a movie you saw. Nobody locked the door. Your questions were answered fully. No, that didn't occur. You couldn't sing anyway, cared less. The moment's a blur. A film fun laughing itself to death in the cold fire. Anyone's guess. Nobody forced you. You wanted to go that day. Begged. You chose the dress. Here are the pictures. Look at you. Look at us all. Smiling, waving, younger. The whole thing is inside your head. What you recall are impressions. We have the facts. We call the tune. The secret police of your childhood were older and wiser than you, bigger than you. Call back the sound of their voices. Boom, boom, boom. Nobody sent you away. That was an extra holiday with people you seemed to like. They were firm. There was nothing to fear. There was no one but yourself to blame if it ended in tears. What does it matter now? No, nobody left the skid marks of sin on your soul and laid you wide open for hell. You were loved, always. We did what was best. We remember your childhood well. Thank you for your attention.